Yo, Eric, we're over here on the paranormal hunt, and I headed over to this other building, and it's number 13. What is this someone on? My God.
All right. So exciting. So exciting. Because, guys, read the title. It's simple. Is Bigfoot proof out there? You know, that's the question. But the question is, on that question, what kind of proof is out there? What are we looking for? And one of the things about Jeff of Pine Island Research, you know, he's been on this channel before. I've been on his channel before. Well, the last time was pretty long ago.
It was epic.
That was epic. That was a night to remember. But the question is, you know, Jeff he talks a lot about DNA and stuff, you know. So the question for this show today is DNA the proof that's out there that we need to I'm not saying have to prove to people, but to change people's minds. So in simple words, Jeff, in your own opinion, I know you had an encounter. I have an encounter. I know Anthony had an encounter with UFOs, but you know, those are stories that we could tell and people could believe those are not. But for the common person, if they're going to talk about Bigfoot, what kind of proof do you think that people are looking for, or what kind of proof you think we should be giving them if we want to prove that Bigfoot's real?
Well, I think that the proof that people are looking for versus the proof that researchers are out trying to get, to some extent, exists on two different planes. And because people expect enough proof to where really you're only going to suffice it if you drop a body off in the Walmart parking lot, you know. I mean
our body's at Walmart parking lot.
Well, yeah, a Bigfoot body, I should clarify. The biggest issue I think that is relevant to the conversation is that everybody requires a different threshold of proof before they believe in anything. And that's true with God, money, any theoretical position. You know, the amount of proof that I need before I say I'm a believer, everybody's on a journey. And let's just use the Bigfoot community, for example, where they would need to be where they've seen enough to say, okay, I believe that this is real. For me, I had an encounter when I was 18 years old before I ever got into research. It was before I even knew anything really about Bigfoot. And it was the type of encounter and at such close range that at that point, I don't have a choice. I mean, people say, do you believe in Bigfoot? By default, I can't explain anything else it could have been. So, but I understand that everybody's on a different journey. They're looking for that threshold of proof that they need to push them over the top. As a researcher, I believe there's 4 different areas of proof that we search for as far as what we're trying to obtain in the field. And that's pictures or video, you know, image content. It would be DNA or testable data. It would be castings or imprints that show a mid-tarsal break and dermal ridges and things like that. And the fourth one would be an audio recording in which you could compare to libraries of known vertebrate and, you know, whether it's a mammal or avian, to see if there's a known species that's capable of making that sound. So out of those 4 things, what's interesting is, you know, if you go back to like the Patterson-Gimlin film, the Patterson-Gimlin film had image quality. I mean, they had a pretty convincing video that to this day seems to stand the test of time with most people. They also had, they seen exactly where it walked. So when it comes to imprints, that evidence is there. They had recordings, or at least you can hear them talking to themselves, or dialogue between them. I don't know that anybody's ever produced any example of a vocalization that was made by Patty on that day. But also, had they been aware of DNA capability back then, they've seen every blade of grass it swished its hand through and could have left a hair on. They've seen every spot that it stepped on and could have left a sebum sample or a skin oil sample, things like that. They just weren't aware of that technology. The reason why I bring that example up is because they had multiple of those 4 things we try to achieve in research in one day and in one location. That is a rarity that has not reproduced itself often in this community. We see pictures or a video, we see people bringing hair samples, we hear audio, but how often do we see 2 or even 3 of those 4 aspects of what research are trying to achieve? That's what we need to see more of. And I think when it comes to DNA technology, that is advancing tenfold every year in the capability that we're at now. That's primarily what I focused on in research last year, and I'll be focusing on it even more in the new project that we're going to be doing next year. So,
what if somebody had that video of that Bigfoot nowadays? Like they just caught it a month ago, with all the fakery now with videos and what you can do with camera pictures and all that. I don't know if people would even say that's real anymore if it came out now, because of the technology. Now, back then, technology wasn't really there yet. You can falsify videos, but it's harder to do than it is now. So would video and picture be that important now, since people can falsify it?
Well, now everything's digital, it seems like. There are people like Matt Larson from Central Florida Bigfoot that's going out and trying to recreate using the same camera, the same technology that Patterson used, just in an attempt to try to recreate and see what's possible and what's not possible with that camera. It will give us a better understanding of what they did that day. But when we're talking about now, with metadata and everything that's used to determine, I think by default, everything starts with the BS flag right out of the gate. You bring it, I don't care if it's a drone video that shows thermal and 4K shot by dual cameras at the same time of a Bigfoot walking, and you can see the mid-tarsal break, and you can see it look up at the drone because it hears it, and it starts walking fast and tries to be elusive. If somebody got that, I'd look at it and it'd be pretty convincing, and I'd say we need to analyze this. We need to look at the metadata. We need to figure out the audio that is captured from that drone, as well as to see if there's anything there other than the motor sound. And, there's a lot of things that you could go over. However, for most people, it starts out with, I'm throwing my red bullshit flag right out of the gate until somebody can convince me otherwise. And by default, I think that's just where people are. They've been burned in this community too much to start anywhere else.
So true. What's it going to take these days, Jeff? Aside from throwing a body, like Eric said, aside from dragging a body into a Walmart parking lot, what's it going to take to make people believe? Are we going to have to get blood, hair? We're going to need the Holy Grail: blood, hair, oil samples. I mean, other than
even with that, how much does DNA even cost to do on something like that? I mean, it
was very expensive. It's still kind of expensive, and we're moving very quickly to an area where it's not only are you not going to need a lab, you will be able to get the equipment to do it in the field. They've already done that. There are scientists who have made something about the size of your cell phone, and they made it for people who were discovering these new species of butterflies. Okay. And so what they did is they preloaded this with a catalog of DNA from all different insects. They weren't worried about what's in Australia, what's in the UK, what's in, they weren't worried about vertebrates, invertebrates, marine, all that stuff. They just loaded it with a small percentage of the DNA library, so to speak, that science holds with these insects, so that when these guys were in the field, they could take that butterfly, and there was a probe on this device that they could touch those wings, and in 2 hours it would run through that catalog and show them if it was a known species of butterfly or if they're looking at something different. Now that's interesting, because if you took that same device and loaded it with all known primate DNA and human DNA, now I could start testing skin oil, or, you see a smudge handprint on the surface. I could start testing all that with that device. We're not there yet, but we're probably only about a year away.
What about this question? What are you going to test the DNA against? How can we prove that is different than normal?
Okay. So
that's brown.
So let's work this backwards. Until you do have a body in the Walmart parking lot that is a Bigfoot, you'll never identify any samplings as Bigfoot. It will always be species X, okay? Or whatever you want to call it. My goal in last year's research was to collect hair samples, skin oil samples from a method that we had used in one area that we got very lucky after searching a lot of areas really hard to find interaction in with objects that we left there. And we collected 27 hair samples and 14 skin oil samples. Now, those are in a lab and they're being tested. And here's what's going to happen. If they come back part human, part unknown primate DNA, I can't say it's Bigfoot. I can't say that one sample is anything. But if sample two, and what's happened in DNA testing is when they get something that's unknown primate, they throw it away, right? I mean, there's nowhere to go. And my thing is, let's catalog these samples. If sample one matches sample two, and that matches sample 14, and on and on and on, we don't know that we have a Bigfoot. We don't know what we have. But if those genomic imprints are identical, and I can get DNA samples from Washington State and northern Minnesota and Oklahoma that are all matching these, we can catalog an infinite number of samples that are all the same genomic imprint of an unknown primate part DNA, part human DNA, that we just have to call species X. And it will always be called that until you eventually have a body. But you can show that there is something that exists with the same genomic imprint in different parts of North America.
I mean, joking aside, somebody wrote, so it could be alien. If there's a different DNA in there, I guess it could be.
I have to approach research as if I'm looking at something that's flesh and blood that may or may not have some supernatural abilities. Okay. But until I uncover that data in research, I have to assume that I'm looking at something flesh and blood. Now, I'll tell you this, if something was alien and you don't even know that it would use the same, does it breathe the same air? Does its living system even work the same as ours? Likely there would be a heart or something that moves fluid that body needs to survive, right? But would it be blood? Would you even be able to test? Is there testable samples? I mean, it's like if I ran a DNA test on transmission fluid that has 100,000 miles on it, none of my equipment's going to know what the hell we're looking at. You know what I mean? And so I don't know that wouldn't be the case there. I mean, whether or not you're talking Bigfoot or not, anything that's not from this ecosystem in which we survive here on Earth, breathing air, it seems like all vertebrates and everything else, you stick a pin in it, it bleeds red, right? Nothing's bleeding green, nothing's bleeding, or fluorescent orange. It seems to be that the delivery of oxygen that the cells need in most living organisms is done with a bloodstream. But I don't know if that would be the case for aliens. That's way beyond what I could answer.
So Jeff, I know some people have sent you trying to see if you do DNA on their hair finding, and I know, like you said, how expensive it could be. So how do you determine if somebody goes, "Hey Jeff, can you do DNA on this?" I mean, I'm sure you just don't. I'm sure you can't say, "Sure, send it to me," because the amount of money that it costs. So how do you determine for yourself if you're going to take on somebody's test for DNA? I mean, what's your requirement for that?
I think that if you ask 10 different scientists, what would your pre-vetting protocol be before you start spending money and wasting time in a lab looking at something that may or may not be Bigfoot related, is probably going to be different to some extent by each person, what they want to see. For me, I simply put it under a microscope. If it's a hair sample, the thing that I would want to see is a 5-scale pattern around the follicle of the hair. Meaning, if this is a hair shaft, around the diameter of that shaft, there are scales that connect around the diameter. And all human hair, doesn't matter what race or what, doesn't matter where you are from in this world, doesn't matter what your skin color is, doesn't matter if your hair is red, blonde, black, brown. All humans are 6 or 7 scales. From most of the hair samples that I've seen collected that I believed were authentic Bigfoot hair, it's a 5-scale pattern around that diameter. These are samples of hair that are very limp, lack of a medulla core. If I pull a hair out of my head or Anthony's head or your head, Eric, there might be a little bit of a natural curve to that hair. And as I turn it and twist it in my fingers, you'll see that curve arc up and arc down and arc up. Bigfoot hair, whether it's 2 inches long or whether it's 8 inches long, it seems like it just lays down. There isn't any structural integrity to it because it has this lack of medulla core. It looks translucent. When people talk about color, I don't put any stock into that because every hair looks different at different times. I can take one hair sample and look at it collectively with 6 strands of hair, and it looks like it has a bourbon and watercolor. And then I look at it alone under a microscope, and there's an inch long where it just looks clear. And then there's a little bit of brown, and then it's clear again. It's like, there may be something to the whole ability to, I don't want to use the word cloak, but camouflage to your surroundings because of that. Because that shaft is hollow on the inside, it's not the outside curve facing you that you're seeing like you do on my hair that makes it look dark, or, somebody else's hair that makes it look blonde. You're typically seeing through that front curvature, and you're seeing the concave in the back of the hair that is capable in certain light conditions of reflecting that which is around it.
Wow.
And so now it's like, depending on the light and how the light's hitting it, you might say, oh, it had really dark hair. And then you look at one of those individual hairs and it's like, holy crap, this thing's almost clear, right?
Well, we have a question for you from Monster Radio. He goes, question for Jeff. What does he make of the variation of Sasquatch people are seeing? Ellie, Gog, and so on. Evolutionary differences or different species altogether?
That's a good question. I would, before I answer what my opinion is on the species, as far as Bigfoot or Sasquatch, whatever name you want to give it, I would say let's look at humans. I mean, if you grew up in an Aboriginal tribe, you'd be used to people not being taller than 5 foot tall, and you've got dark skin colors, and everybody has dark hair. And then one day, somebody puts you on a plane and flies you somewhere, and you get out and you stand there and look at Shaquille O'Neal at 7 foot whatever.
You're shocked.
290 pounds or 340 pounds with a size 22 foot, and it's just like it's like this guy isn't human. That's what you would think. I'm not looking at a human here. And you look at the distinct differences in our appearance between Asians, African American, Caucasian, there are distinct differences that if you weren't from this planet, you might say those two people walk upright, but they speak different languages, they sound different, they look distinctively different. You might not assume that they're the same species. And so when we look at Bigfoot and say, well, down south where it gets really hot, a lot of the depictions that you see drawn of people explaining what they saw entail really short hair or shorter hair, less follicles per square inch, because in that heat, that body needs to ventilate. Whereas up north, and I don't mean in the middle of the country, I mean up north, northern Minnesota, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, places like that, you hear a lot of depictions of its hair draped down like 10 inches long, and it was thick. And that's because that body needs to insulate. It's 40 below zero and 30 miles an hour wind 5 months a year. And they may need to be 10 foot tall and 1,200 pounds.
So adaptation then.
Yeah, it in the middle, along the Mason-Dixon line, you might see representations of both of those extremes. But when you're down in Florida or Texas, or you're up in Saskatchewan, you might see really distinct differences in height, size, hair length, things like that.
Kind of like a grizzly and a polar bear. You know what I mean? When you got that, you got the foxes that are white. It's all adaptation, right?
Well,
so
another great example, Ron, would be I am a hunting guide up here in South Dakota, and I guide in Wyoming, Montana, Idaho, and a white-tailed deer up here is going to weigh 285 pounds. And I lived in Georgia before, and I know that a mature 7-year-old buck at its maturest size, although they have impressive horn growth, the typical antler growth comparable to up here, the body size is literally 35 to 40% smaller. And that's usually attributed to forage. You have a lot of corn-fed, soybean-fed deer in the upper Midwest and whatnot, and down there you have them eating acorns and things like that. It's just a different nutrient intake. But you've got at 7 years old, a mature buck in those two areas, distinctly different in size, way different in size. And yet, let's do a DNA test on genomically, they're the same exact species.
So that's why the New Yorkers are bigger than me, because they're from the colder climate.
Pasta. Those are really good points, Jeff.
You can only get so fat eating Dungeness crab in Washington, and when you got pizza on every corner in New York,
Hey, let me ask you a question, Jeff. Is there catalogs, books, places to go where you can look up what the different hair follicles look like Bigfoot, what his hair follicle looks like, opposed to a human follicle? Did anybody do it to show the difference? So people,
is there a database or anything?
I don't know that how helpful it would be, because you've got to understand, depending on where you're at, and we talked about the distinct differences that could exist geographically, right, in appearance and what that hair may look like.
Right.
I've seen Tim, a friend of mine from Florida, has had Bigfoot hair samples that he shared with me that were only about 2.5, 3 inches long. They were jet black in color. They looked coarse, like they came off of a hog. I mean, distinctively different, but he knew the method that he had collected these hairs, that he was about 95% sure these came off of a Sasquatch. And they were void of a medulla core, but they were coarser. Now, if you think about that, coarse hair will stand up off of the skin before it drapes over, okay? Whereas very fine limp hair, especially longer hair, will just mat over the skin. The difference between ventilating and insulating because of the climates. So I wouldn't expect 10-inch limp flat hair laying on the skin on a skunk ape, so to speak, in Florida. I would expect it to be coarser and stand up off of the skin before it, was to droop or to curve.
Okay.
Because it needs to get rid of that regulated body heat in that climate, So if I had pictures and said, well, here's what Bigfoot hair looks like, I could show you 5 different samples of Bigfoot hair, and they don't even all look the same, It'd be like saying, well, let me show you what human hair looks like, and then I'm going to take some from Carrot Top, and I'm going to take some from, blonde hair from Daryl Hannah, and I'm going to, I mean, they don't look the same. So.
How many reports have you heard of Bigfoot climbing trees? Is that do you think that's common that they hide up in trees? No bears could climb up trees. Lightning.
I think that juveniles would probably do that. So much of this, Anthony, I try to look at and say, well, let's compare it to human behavior, okay? And not because I think that they're equal to us in some way, but if we're talking about a creature who does not act primarily or solely on instinct, okay? I believe they can show emotion. I believe that they hold reverence for each other, things like that. So, if I'm hunting and I've got a white-tailed deer walks by, I can about tell you 99.9% sure that if I do this, that's how it's going to react. Okay. And that's the case with a lot of animals. It's pretty predictable because their number one goal is to survive, right? They're surviving. And so they're programmed to do the same thing. There's great examples of that with like domestic house cats. Okay. I can say, oh, my domestic house cat's so sweet. She'll lay on anybody's lap. Anybody can pet her. She never gets angry. When that cat is laying there in the sun on the carpet, tie a feather to a string and drag it across the floor and watch that cat go into pursuit mode.
Right.
It is programmed to do that instinctively. Now, I believe most animals are, especially ones that live out in the wild. When it comes to humans, we aren't all the same. You put all 4 of us in a 7-Eleven and somebody comes in and pulls a gun out to rob the place, all 4 of us might act differently. One of us might tackle them. One of us might scream and curl up in a ball in the corner and start crying. The other one might run out the door. I mean, we just react so differently based on emotion, which is very, very sort of human behavior, not other, and we see it in primates too. A lot of primates do that. So when we say, do Bigfoot climb trees? When I look at humans or other things, if they were all the size of most primates, monkeys, orangutans, I'd say, well, sure they do. But if one was to reach 8 foot tall or bigger and weigh in excess of 800 pounds, there's not a lot of trees that it could climb. The strength it would take to move its own body weight through a tree, be able to maneuver through it, and then the structural integrity of the tree to handle it. So I'd say I think it's common that probably juveniles do. You get something that weighs 5 foot tall and 300 pounds, and it's a young teenager. Of course it's going to. When I was a teenager, I climbed trees all the time. As a 53-year-old adult, I don't climb trees anymore.
You do it. You're still young.
I mean, I only asked because their agility. I mean, we know they're out in the forest, and one could be 10 feet away from you. You wouldn't even probably know it.
Yeah,
Like
I believe that. That's why I think a lot of people get confused with this whole supernatural thing, right? In my encounter, I had heard a very loud crack where a tree of pretty good size was snapped in half. There was so much deadfall and so much. It was up in northern Manitoba. It was a lot of pine trees, birch trees, poplars, cedars. It was really thick forest. And so I'm looking and thinking, I know that was 40 to 50 yards in, straight 90 degrees to my left. Now, I was expecting to see a black bear. I really was. And being somebody who grew up hunting and the son of a hunting guide, and even though I was only 18 years old, I'd already been bear hunting in Montana. I'd already spent 8-10 day trips elk hunting in Idaho. And so I'd been in these remote areas, kind of knew how to act if I found myself in the presence of a mountain lion or a bear, things like that. I was pretty sure that there was a black bear there. And because it was the first week in June, I didn't just want to start backing down the trail in a hurry. I don't want to trigger that pursuit mode in a sow black bear that has 2 cubs with it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I wanted to at least visually identify what made that sound.
Right.
So I stood on that trail watching for almost 2 minutes. And it got to be to where I just felt like perhaps an animal didn't make that sound. Perhaps we've got the weight of one tree laying on another and it finally just cracked for whatever reason. It'd be astronomically weird that would happen right at that point, but maybe that's what happened. Before I walk down the trail, it's about 30% grade. I look up it and here I'm staring right at the thighs, 15 feet away from us at the thighs of a Sasquatch. And how it got from A to B without making any noise. I mean, there was not a breeze that day. You could hear somebody snap their fingers from 100 yards away. Blows me away. But shortly after that, I started my 6-year stint in the military. And I was stationed at Fort Benning, Georgia, and I worked at the airborne school. And that's where the 1st and the 2nd and the 75th Ranger Battalion is. And I had come to know a lot of guys in the Ranger Battalion. And if you ever watched a recruit or somebody who is, let's say, less than 2 years in one of those Ranger battalions will move through the woods, it's not exactly fluid, you know, it's not but you watch somebody who's 12, 14 years in do it,
like a ninja.
And you start realizing that this guy lives and breathes that. He does this every day, day after day.
We talked about that.
Day. And if you have a Sasquatch whose number one goal is to remain elusive, and it's not just there like we are, you know, I even if I'm a hunting guide and spend 70, 80, 100 days a year in the woods, we're talking 24 hours a day, nonstop, no modern shelter, no modern heat. Its ability to move from A to B may be at a level that I can't even wrap my mind around and comprehend to my human understanding. It may seem supernatural. Right. It somehow floated across the ground, or it went into a porthole and popped out here. You know, you're going to hear people come up with ways to justify the fact that they can't wrap their head around maybe possibly just how good it got at doing that.
Yeah, I still can't wrap my head around it. You think to yourself, well, then that means that they have to be, you know, adult Sasquatch have to be training the young how to do this out in the wild. Sure. And while they're training, well, why aren't we spotting more the juvenile Sasquatch then? Because they're bound to make mistakes while they're learning how to do this.
Yeah, I think they learn it so fast, though. I think they learn it so fast. I mean, if you think about it, Anthony, so to speak. I've got boys, like I say, they're 17, 18 years old. Every day for the first 17 years of their life, I would spend maybe, when they're 10, 12 years old, maybe one day a week we're going and watching them play baseball for an hour, right? Or maybe we're doing whatever. Maybe I drive them to soccer practice 3 times a week, and for an hour they practice soccer. What if they practice soccer 24 hours a day, every day?
Valid point.
There is no learning curve. I mean, the learning curve, the duration of the learning curve is so small.
Right.
That by 5 years old, I can't stop them from getting a soccer ball pass.
Right.
If that was the case.
Right.
And so I think that to some degree, I don't think they're born with it. I think they're just environmentally conditioned to learn these things at around the clock, nonstop, at a learning pace that doesn't require much time to grasp it,
And also, like animals, you know how like they all age differently. Like animals age more advanced than humans.
Mm-hmm.
So who knows if that's even part of it? That is just what we could look as a little adolescent, probably 20 years old compared to us. Right.
Yeah. There's, like I say, there's really no way to grasp. Would one live? I could tell you that my life expectancy, living the way that the 4 of us live, and what our life expectancy would be if we lived off the grid with no power and hunted for our food and placed ourselves in relative danger on a daily basis just to survive, that, we may be expected to live 55 years rather than, 78 years. You know what I mean? But yet, as a species, I don't know what they're capable of. If in the end, we get a body and we learn from it and we find others and we keep learning, and in the end, we find out they live to be 120 years old, I couldn't say that I never expected that. You could tell me they live to be 40 years old, and that's it. I can't say that I never expected that because I truly don't know.
Yeah.
But
no, Jeff, if there was a body, say somebody did leave a Bigfoot body out of Walmart, just said he did, you think, of course, we know who's going to take it. Government's going to take it because it could be a danger to society. But do you think they'll ever report to us exactly what they would find in the DNA?
I think that really comes down to who finds it and what's the protocol that they follow to get it vetted.
What do you even do with it?
Keep it out of the hands of somebody who would cover
off of it.
What we would learn from it up. I don't know how easy that would be. I think that people are naive to some extent to the capability of, we'll call it the government, but it could be anybody who really had an organized, financed mission of keeping you or anybody in this community from being successful at advancing the ball in this, solving the mystery. If they were organized and financed well enough, you'd be pretty hard pressed to win that. I mean, I'm not a huge conspiracy theorist, but I believe that, let's just say the government's fine with everybody researching it and trying to solve it. It's fine knowing that they're out there. But if somebody was to start flying too close to the sun, so to speak, when it comes to really doing something that would move that ball, I think that it's reasonable to expect that there would be some interference in that. Whether or not it would be successful interference, I think that you're naive if you were to approach it and not be prepared for there to be some interference.
Some people say there already is a Bigfoot body and it is being studied, but I can't tell you that's true or not.
There's some people who say that the government's aware of every single one of them and where they're at, and there's a lot of people who really. I don't believe that's the case, but we have so many things. I don't ever speak factually on anything concerning Bigfoot. I develop theories. Just like we talked about, the more follicles per square inch, the less follicles per square inch, ventilation versus insulation. No, that's a theory for me. I think there's others that have heard that and agree with it. I think there's some, for some reason, that disagree with it. They saw one in Florida that had really long hair. There's nothing to say that there can't be anomalies to the theory, but to come out, there's so many people in research and investigations and boots on the ground field work in the Bigfoot community that speak factually on things that are not proven to be fact. And I don't think that does any service to the community. It's misleading. And if we ever did have a body, the only thing you've answered is that they exist to all of those people who thought that they may not. You didn't tell me anything that I didn't already know. And really, that question of whether or not they exist or not, you've opened up 1,000 new questions. We're going to now argue about where they exist, what they eat, how old they could grow to be, how many there are and where they aren't. Behaviorally, do they do this, do that? That body isn't going to answer all those questions. It might answer some of them, but it's not going to, it's going to invoke more questions to be answered.
I just wonder how long it's going to take till somebody films one crystal clear and there's no denying that, boom, that's it. It's out there 100%. And I also wonder why the government's not out there tagging them and tracking them and studying them.
Or are they?
Well, when it comes to that, yeah, you don't know that they are.
You know?
Listen, we had this conversation last night on my show. I had Seth Breedlove and Alex Petticoff from Small Town Monsters on. They just released their documentary, Alaskan Coastal Sasquatch, which is, they released the first part of it. The second part comes out on Christmas Day. It's pretty interesting. But we started talking about things like mountain lions and stuff. Now, mountain lions are very elusive to humans. I mean, 99 out of 100 times, if you see a mountain lion from 100 yards away and you raise your hands up, that thing runs like hell. It does not want anything to do with being around a human. But if you're riding your mountain bike down a trail or you're jogging down a trail with your earbuds in, it's just like that feather in front of that domestic house cat. You can trigger a pursuit mode to where it almost gets in a trance. It starts following you on a trail and you start screaming at it and it doesn't back down because it's in that pursuit mode. It's very hard to break that. You have to get big. You have to scream nonstop and snap it out of that mode to get it to be like, whoa, wait a minute. I don't want anything to do with this. Otherwise, it's just doing what it's programmed to do, right? But even as elusive as they are, I mean, I know hunting guides that are out in Montana and Idaho that have guided for decades that have never been in front of one before, right? And yet they're all over out there. And when you look at every state's DNR or game fish and parks, whatever they call their organization, they know exactly how many tags to issue. They know what the population numbers are. They have so many of them collared. And you think about how elusive these things are, and yet every state knows pretty down to a science about how many they have in that state.
Okay.
And so for an organization that has basically limitless funding to be able to estimate the population of something that is very hard for any of us to walk out and put ourselves in front of, that should be a testimony to that. If the government wanted to study Sasquatch, it could. It could get an idea of how many there are.
How about this, Jeff? What do you want of a Bigfoot? What are you looking for? I mean, what do you want? What would satisfy you on the Bigfoot?
Well, I don't think there's one researcher that's going to go out on their own and flip everything on its ear. I think it has to be done collectively. I put a lot of stock in not just where DNA is at now, but where it's going. And there are a lot of misperception as far as what DNA technology is capable of doing, right? But I will say that what I did last year was trying to find that perfect spot, trying to, those of you who have learned about the Red Bull experiment that I did out there and how it got moved, how we identified something moved it. It was not a bear. It was not, it was moved 85 yards across the field. There was no wind that night. And so then we started looking and making ourselves part of a routine by dropping things in this area and picking it up. It was very remote. I had to kayak 9 miles in, 9 miles out twice a week to drop stuff off and then to go back and retrieve it 24 hours later. We would test these for hair samples that were left on Velcro tabs on objects, things like that. We've seen enough to know that we felt that we were dealing with Sasquatch interacting with these objects. And the evidence that we collected is now in a lab being analyzed. But that was a 37-week long process. I kayaked over 1,000 miles a year going in and out of that area. You look at the amount of work that went in to collect something that we're not even sure what was moving that ball. I mean, I'm pretty sure what it was, but I wouldn't, if I had $1 million, I wouldn't bet all of them on it, right? I started looking at what's called vector research. And this is what the last 3 years has gotten really big. You've got scientists that are well-funded. There was a group of scientists two of them from Sweden that worked with a biohub out of a university in California. And it was a collective of 5 different countries that brought their experts in viral transfer, okay? Meaning they put out mosquito traps in 2 different wetland areas in California and collected mosquitoes. And what they did, and just in one night, and what they did is that out of the hundreds of mosquitoes they had, they went through and said, in the last 24 hours, how many of these mosquitoes have fed on a blood host? They could tell by looking at them microscopically. This one's fed on a blood host. What they were studying is viral transfer, meaning could a mosquito bite a mule deer that has a certain virus and later bite a rabbit and transfer that virus to that rabbit? That's what they were studying. They didn't care about humans. That wasn't part of the study. They were studying vertebrate mammals and avians. So squirrels, egrets, things that would be in this area, rabbits, mule deer, fox. They had 60 mosquitoes that had a blood host, that had fed on a blood host in the last 24 hours. 15 of those 60, when they tested them, it had fed on a human. So what did they do? They threw them out. They weren't interested in those. Let's look at the other 45. And they classified those into, this was a mule deer, this was a cow, they knew exactly the genomic breakdown that mosquito had fed on. So what they started doing was they had 4 different species of mosquitoes there. They had to learn, one, what does the genomic imprint look like on all 4 of those different mosquitoes, so that when we test a sample, we can say, okay, that is this mosquito's DNA. Let's get rid of that. Let's look at the DNA that's left. What was the blood host that it fed on? And they accurately identified it every single freaking time.
Wonder how many bit of Sasquatch.
Now, that's my point, Anthony, is they threw away the ones that had DNA, human DNA in them. Now, understand that these wetlands were in California. They were 20 miles outside of the nearest metropolis, metro area. A mosquito in its 100-hour to 150-hour lifespan, depending on wind and wind current, will probably have a range of not more than 25 miles, these scientists figured. So where I had my encounter up in northern Manitoba, I know that where I was, there wasn't another human being in a 20-mile circle around where me and my party was when we had that encounter. You get into these areas of Alaska and British Columbia that are very hard to access, and you put mosquito traps out and you collect thousands of samples. And now let's work what they did in reverse. I'm looking for human or part human part primate or part human, part unknown primate DNA, and I'm keeping those samples. And if it was a black bear, a mule deer, a brown bear, a moose, we throw all those away.
Yep.
I don't care about those. We're just looking at the ones that had any human or part human DNA on them. I don't need to kayak 1,000 miles. I could get thousands of samples in one night from these vectors or these mosquitoes, and we could look at the ones that have had a blood host, and then we can, what they do is they take one that has had a blood host. You'd think that they'd put like a little micro needle in that little cavity and pull the blood out. They don't. They puree it, turn it into a mosquito milkshake. And that's how you most accurately test it. That takes some time, that takes some money. But if we could quicken the process of discounting whether or not it's human DNA versus any other vertebrae and throw all the others out, and then the human vertebrae or the human DNA or part human DNA samples, analyze them down to where we're coming up with the genomic footprint, so to speak, or fingerprint, and start looking at them. Now, again, none of them are going to come back and say it's Sasquatch. What I want to know is, does sample 1 match sample 237, match sample 279, match sample 384? They're all identical. And they're different. This one's a male. This one's a female. And these ones were in Saskatchewan. And these ones were in Washington State. And you start collecting them and you start running that type of a process. There are enough scientists out there right now that want to put a thumbs up or a thumbs down to this Bigfoot argument. I'll be famous either way if I'm a scientist involved in that. I'm either going to prove it is or it isn't.
Yeah.
And you may have to get 5,000 mosquitoes before you get one that has the DNA that you're looking for to catalog. But if you can cheapen the process and get it streamlined enough, I think that would be the key to the unlocking this DNA thing.
Well, that's the thing. How much is it cost?
Sex as well as we can. And so there is an existing creature that is identical to all the ones that we've identified in different geographical areas of North America. This thing is real and it's out there and we don't know what it is. Is it Bigfoot? No, it's species X. And eventually when you do get a body, if it's the same, now we can say it's not species X anymore, it's Bigfoot. Until you have a body, it'll always be species X.
Now, have you done some DNA already that you question? Any reports?
We have samples in a lab right now that was going to be featured in Legend Meets Science 2 later in 2023. Now, how that comes out, in retrospect, once I started learning about this vector study that these scientists were doing, and understand there are more of these studies that are being funded to take place in universities all across North America now, because what's the one thing that this pandemic brought forth was we wanted to learn how easily it is to contract from each other.
Right.
In the zoo here in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, we had a Canadian lynx and an African lioness both die within 48 hours of COVID. They both died and tested positive of COVID at a zoo. So now I have to ask myself, how many white-tailed deer have it? How many of our swine and cattle operations have it? You know, I mean, I don't think science has a clear understanding as to what species can contract it, what variants can they contract, how easily is it spread. So they're sticking a lot of money into research into these. Now, if you could piggyback on one of these universities and say, here's what I'd like, all those human ones you're going to throw out, just give them to me.
And I
that
bet
won't cost me.
They don't need it anyway, right?
They're throwing it in the garbage. Anyway,
yeah, right.
Just give it to me. If you could contract and partner with, some of these studies that are taking place. The problem is they're funded with government money and grants. So right away, you've left the back door unlocked for somebody to come in and say, oh, hell no. If that's what you're doing, no.
So true.
I think there's enough scientists out there that understand that we're getting close enough. Cameras are getting better every year. DNA technology is getting better every year. And I don't want to be the scientist who denied this plausible possibility that this could exist and get caught with my ass out once the truth is out. So instead, I'd rather be involved in the thumbs up or thumbs down. I can't lose that way. If I can get a team of 12 scientists and one accredited lab to say we will work collectively and from a neutral standpoint to put a thumbs up or thumbs down, we'll test as many samples as you want to bring into us. And they're doing it because they want to be the team that either proved or disproved the possibility of Bigfoot. I think there's plenty of scientists that are finding themselves in that position now.
Absolutely.
Before we close out the show, my daughter's getting her stuff ready for school. Jeff, what do you got coming up? Are you doing any shows, guests on your channel this week?
Well, we just had, like I said, we just had Alex and Seth Breedlove from Small Town Monsters on last night. Next Monday, I'm trying to remember who we got scheduled. I've got a couple big guests scheduled right after Christmas. That's going to be exciting. And one of them, I haven't got the date nailed down yet, but I am looking to have Rob Lowe on the show.
Excellent.
He did a season of the Lowe Files.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
And what I thought was really interesting about that show was that he did it with, so that's my old channel there, Pine Island Research. You can see all my shows that are 3 months and older on there. And I'm going to start doing some morning chill streams, come have coffee. We'll talk about what you want to talk about. All my new shows on Monday nights are being done on the Untold Radio Network's channel.
Oh.
And what that is on Untold Radio AM. It's a YouTube channel. We're out on all the podcast platforms. We're syndicated on several radio stations. And we are a collective of 7 different channels that all joined the Untold Radio Network.
Untold Radio broadcast?
What's that?
What's it called again?
Untold Radio. Yeah, just search that. It's Untold Radio AM, but you'll find Untold Radio Network. There it is.
Oh, okay.
And so on Monday night, I have my show, but there's 2 of our shows that really focus on Sasquatch research. But we have Jason McLean and Dr. Dean Bertram talking ufology, talking about the Loch Ness Monster, talking about ghosts. I mean, there is something for everybody in this paranormal stew that is being brewed over at Untold Radio. Mm-hmm. But if you go to the playlist, if you click on playlist, Eric, now when you scroll down, you'll see each show is divided. And if you keep going down, keep going down. Oh, it doesn't go down.
I'm all the way down.
well,
but
wait a minute.
I can go across.
Yeah, I guess. So, yeah, if you click on Pine Island, it'll actually bring up all of just Pine Island stuff. And then we've got Mysterious Library, where Dr. Dean Bertram and Jason McLean from Texas Front Porch and them get together, and they pick a different book every week that's been within any area of the paranormal that has been relevant for it may be a book 10 years old. And they talk about that book and what is in that book and what it answered and what questions it raises. And a lot of really interesting topics are covered throughout the network. Mine is pretty much the nuts and bolts and tech, the different things that we do in research as it appears to. And I do have a lot of people who've had encounters on.
Gosh, Chris made us a meme. I forgot to tell you. She made us the 3 of us a holiday meme.
No, but the Rob Lowe show that I'd like to do is he did that series with his son, who was a teenager.
Yeah,
they got
that.
He got in his F-150 Raptor and they drove across the country, right? And they went to a haunted prison in Idaho. They went to look at Sasquatch on a property in Texas.
Oh, Rob Lowe.
Every episode was different, right? But what was so cool about it is he did it with his son. And so my angle of this isn't just talking about these interesting places he went to, but as a father of 17 and 18-year-old boys, I'm trying to stay relevant in their daily lives, trying to find things that I can do with them. I see them taking interest in hunting and fishing and the different things that I do. And he did this with his kid. And his kid got so comfortable in front of the camera. His kid went on and started a career in this and now has a series on Netflix.
It's not
So
fair. Garoppolo looks
Nice to have famous
good.
father.
The man still looks good.
I know, right?
I'm
I can't.
serious,
That's the
he
one thing I
looks
want to tell him
good.
is, you know what?
I still remember
We
him in
were in high
Youngblood.
when I was in high school. My girlfriend had a picture of him hanging in her locker door. Not a picture of me. Had a picture of Rob Lowe, right?
And he still looks the same.
And yeah, and you still look the same as they're hanging in her locker, right? I mean, how do you do that?
Well, I'm gonna have everybody in the chat. I want to thank everybody showing up. I'm gonna have to wrap this up. I got to take my daughter to school. I appreciate Jeff jumping on here today. That I asked him last night. One night, he goes, "When you come on this week?" I'll go, "How about tomorrow?" He said yes.
Yeah,
And
Jeff's
I said, "Hell yes." And I want to thank Anthony and Ron. I know Anthony's got a show tomorrow at 9 a.m. Pacific time, 12 o'clock East Coast time.
Yep.
And most of the time he invites myself and Ron until he gets tired of us. Tell us get the hell out of here.
Never.
That'll be soon. But beyond that, guys, I do got to end the show. I want to say thank you all for being here. It's all fantastic.
Good seeing
And
you, Jeff.
I'm going to tell you guys something real quick backstage.